Hey y'all, we are the Stewarts. My husband, Russell, is an artist, and I am May, and I have an interest in true crime. We decided to merge our two interests together. Enjoy this calming visual while listening to a tragic story. This is Stewart and Crime. Warning, this episode contains discussion about sexual assault. Listener discretion is advised. February 1974 was an oddly popular time for kidnappings in the United States. 19-year-old Patty Hearst was kidnapped from her Berkeley apartment on February 4th by the Sudanese Liberation Army. Their main intention with this kidnapping was to leverage the Hearst family's political influence to free two SLA members who had been arrested for the murder of Marcus Foster. When this plan failed, the SLA demanded that the Hearst family distribute $70 million worth of food to every needy Californian, an operation that would cost an estimated $400 million. In response, Hearst's father took out a loan and arranged the immediate donation of $2 million worth of food to the poor of the Bay Area in an operation called People in Need. The SLA then called this inadequate and asked for $6 million more. The Hearst Corporation said it would donate the additional sum if the girl was released unharmed. In April, Patty was seen on surveillance participating in an armed robbery of a bank. She later declared in a tape sent to the authorities that she had joined the SLA on her own free will. Finally, on September 18, 1975, after crisscrossing the country with her captors, or co-conspirators, for more than a year, Hearst, or Tanya, as she called herself now, was captured in a San Francisco apartment and arrested for armed robbery. Despite her claim that she had been brainwashed by the SLA, she was convicted on March 20, 1976, and sentenced to 7 years in prison. She served 21 months before her sentence was commuted by President Carter. 40-year-old Reg Murphy, editor of Atlanta Constitution, answered his door on February 20, 1974, and was convinced by the man on his doorstep to leave with him to help a charity. But minutes into their drive, the man pulled out a gun and later stuffed Murphy, blindfolded, into the trunk. The kidnapper was William Williams, and he held Murphy captive for 3 days while playing a game of cat and mouse with the FBI. Reg Murphy was finally released after the Atlanta Constitution paid the $700,000 ransom. William Williams was arrested for the crime only 6 hours after Murphy was released, and all of the money was recovered. 17-year-old Carla Walker and 18-year-old Rodney McCoy went to eat at a West Fort Worth seafood restaurant before going to the Valentine's dance at their school on February 16, 1974. They stayed at the dance most of the evening, then went for a drive with another couple. After taking the other couple back to their car, McCoy drove to Brunswick Ridge Bowl on US 377 so Carla could use the restroom. By that time, it was early the next morning, Sunday the 17th, when Carla went in to the bowling alley. When she returned, the two sat in the parking lot for a while, kissing. When suddenly, a man came from out of nowhere, jerked Carla's door open, and started to pull her out of the car. McCoy tried to fight the attacker, but was hit in the head with the handle of the gun, and the assailant was saying, "I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you." Carla then said, "I'll go with you, just don't shoot him." And McCoy heard the man say, "I'm going to take you with me, sweetie." Then he passed out from his head wound. McCoy woke up several minutes later to find Carla and the man gone, and he was bleeding from the wounds on his head. McCoy just started driving and ended up driving up onto the Walker's yard, jumped out and yelled, "Mr. Walker, they've got her. They're going to hurt her real bad." The search began in Benbrook, Texas, a suburb of Fort Worth, for the 17-year-old, while McCoy was at the hospital being treated for his head wounds. Once released, he was asked to take a polygraph test, which he agreed to, and was let go afterward, but first was able to give this description to the police. The abductor was white, in his early 20s, with short brown hair, cut military style, clean-shaven, and wearing a light brown cowboy hat. The police organized search parties and even did a helicopter search on the city's west side, but turned up no evidence, except for a purse, which was recovered in the bowling alley parking lot. At this time, 2 Fort Worth patrolmen, J.B. Weaver and L.B. Barksdale, recommended picking up a 25-year-old man who was known to frequent the bowling alley. When interviewing people at the bowling alley, the officers learned many felt uncomfortable around this man and described him as being capable of the kidnapping. He was a suspected drug pusher who had recently cut his hair short and had Western clothes, including several cowboy hats. This man was also there the night of the abduction, but had been unable to be located after that night. A second day of searching began as some officers looked into finding the 25-year-old man. Others re-examined McCoy's car and Carla's purse for any trace of fingerprints. The FBI had been called in, and a reward fund was started by the Benbrook mayor, Wayne Wilson, who put in $100 that would be paid for the safe return of Carla. That Monday, at school, classmates seemed to all have the same feelings for Carla, stating, "She was the sweetest person you'd ever want to meet, a student who made all A and B grades in her classwork, and a person without an enemy in the world." The third day, the police put out a pickup order for the 25-year-old man in connection to the kidnapping, describing him as 6 feet tall and that he drives a light-colored Camaro automobile, but they emphasized that the man was only wanted for questioning and was not a suspect at this time. The police also announced that they found a cowboy hat that had been blown from its owner's head that could possibly belong to the abductor. On this day, Homicide Lieutenant Oliver E. Ball made this statement: "We really don't have anything yet. Yes, we're getting worried. We need help. If anybody has any information in the case, we'll be glad to keep it confidential if they want it that way." The man the police were searching for was brought in to take a polygraph test. He passed, with the administrator of the test even stating, "If I ever ran one on the box who told the truth, it was him." Detective Ball added to that by saying, "But he never was a real suspect." The man was released and cleared of any possible guilt in Carla's disappearance. Also, for the second day straight, a half-dozen men on horseback searched the Lake Benbrook area, probing remote sections of the area looking for clues. Late in the afternoon, Benbrook Police Chief B.R. Brown expressed deep concern, stating, "We didn't find a thing. We're just about at the end of our row. I just don't believe she's out here now. We've been over everything with a fine-tooth comb." On the fourth day, students at the Western Hills High School pledged $700 in reward money for information on the kidnapping of Carla. The seniors started it, but it was turned into a whole school action. They signed a slip of paper with their names and the amount of money they are pledging if it's needed. They got up to $700, and I'm sure there will be more. This is a tragic thing, but I'm glad to see our kids pulling together on this, stated school's assistant principal, Bob Lee. For 4 days, the FBI, about 6 or 7 homicide detectives, and Benbrook police searched for clues and leads in Carla's mysterious abduction. The police say they are still unsure of the motive, but believe ransom is not the purpose of the kidnapping. Then later in the evening of that day, February 20th, Carla Walker's body was discovered. It was about 6:30 p.m. when 2 Fort Worth policemen discovered Carla's body in a culvert near Benbrook Lake. Officer Minter later said, "I think about that case every day of my life. You just don't forget crawling into a culvert with the body of a 17-year-old girl in a prom dress, particularly when you have a daughter of your own, as I do." Mr. and Mrs. Walker were called to Fort Worth Hospital to identify their daughter's body. Carla Walker had been raped and strangled. Boyfriend Rodney McCoy and Carla's parents had not given up hope for Carla's safe return until told of the discovery of her body. Mayor Wilson, who was at the Walker home every day answering phone calls, went to the site of where the body was found. And once satisfied that these were the remains of 17-year-old Carla Walker, Mayor Wilson went back to the Walker home to relay the information to McCoy. He had been staying with the Walkers since the kidnapping. He collapsed and broke up after being told the body found today in the culvert fit the description of Carla, her dress, and her rings. Rodney McCoy was so broken up, he couldn't talk with school friends from Western Hills, who came by to see him. He had hoped until the last minute Carla would be found alive. Once the Walkers identified their daughter's remains, Mr. Walker began talking about the outpouring of support, stating, "No words I could express could let them know how happy we felt over the way in which people have called and come by offering to help in any way they could. There is a Western Hills basketball game, and afterward, many students gathered at the church for a prayer service for his daughter. We went and were very gratified. There was no room left. It was full. The goodness sure comes out of people in times like this." Carla Walker's funeral was held on February 22nd, 1974, with over 1,200 people in attendance of the service held at Western Hills Church of Christ. Minister Elton Dilbeck performed the service, saying, "The coming of death is worse when it comes with startling alarm." And later he went on to declare, "Justice will come to all evildoers. Offenders must live with themselves, live with their conscience, and their consciences can lay on the lash. And most importantly, they face the justice of God." This next section will be read as calendar pages falling away, so keep that image in mind during this next part. February 24th, reward funds total $5,000 in Carla Walker's slaying. Fund at Benbrook State Bank, $2,000. The Tarrant County Crime Commission, $1,000. The Fort Worth Bowling Proprietors Association, $1,200. Students at Western Hills High School pledged $1,500. All for information leading to the capture of Carla Walker's killer. February 27th, public statements. We talked to a lot of people and we checked up on a lot of things, but nothing good came of it all. Yesterday, we had something that looked real good for a while, but it turned to water too. Detective Oliver E. Ball. The persons, if they want to remain confidential, can do so. We will take the money and deliver it any place, any time. I hope the money will help bring to justice the party or parties responsible for this tragedy. Someone may be sitting somewhere with information, waiting for this thing," said Mayor Wilson. March 3rd, reward announcement. $1,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and indictment of either the abductor or the killer of Carla Walker. All information confidential. Initial information must be furnished within 30 days from this publication. Additional offer. If there were 2 or more who participated in the abduction and killing of Carla Walker, and one of such participants is willing to cooperate with legal authorities in furnishing information leading to the arrest and conviction of the other participants, special effort will be made in behalf of the informant to secure consideration from the prosecuting authorities, provided initial information is furnished within 30 days from this publication and before arrests have been made. Any such information should be reported directly to codename Dalton. I am not kin, and I have not been in contact with the Carla Walker family. I made this offer with a time limitation of 30 days. We want action now. I believe that there were 2 or more people involved, and I believe that one of them is going to be caught. Signed, a concerned citizen. March 24th. Last offer. I am convinced, from the information given, one caller knows the identity of the killer, but the clue given has not been quite enough. I request that person to call me again, and this time, give me the name of the killer and collect the rewards. Your life is in danger, so long as you know the name of the killer and you do nothing about it. If you are involved, I will assist you in getting special consideration from the legal authorities. Unless this name is given to me no later than April 10th, 1974, you are going to lose a lot of money. Your life will still be in danger, and you will be in danger of being prosecuted if you are involved. Ask directly for Dalton. March 25th. The unknown suspect is described as white, approximately 20 years old, approximately 5'10", and weighing 165 to 170 pounds. Color of hair is unknown, but is cut short about the ears, cut close on top with a small wave on top, not curly, and sideburns not visible. Police say he was wearing a light-colored, almost white cowboy hat and a shiny green sleeveless vest. He talked with a Western accent. The man may have been driving a green or greenish shade, solid color, intermediate size car, with amber parking lights visible from the side. In the middle of April 1974, the Fort Worth Task Force on Rape and the group Dallas Now were fighting against the way rape was seen in the eyes of the public and the courts. A member of the task force realized, "We have conditioned our young women to be victims." And the Dallas Now stated, "The law should recognize that our society unfairly puts the entire burden for control of sexuality on the woman, and that almost any action she takes can be interpreted to mean she is sexually available. This assumption is reasonable for the 'she asked for it' attitude toward many rape victims." An example that I found that proves the bias against rape victims at this time, and could be argued that this bias still happens today, was from an article in the Dallas Star-Telegram on March 10th, 1974. Here is the story. A woman named Susan B. was moving into her new home last August when she heard a knock at the door. When she opened the door, she saw a man who came by to welcome her to the neighborhood. She stated, "We stood at the door and I asked him his name, and we talked about the street and the neighborhood. Then I finally invited him in because it was getting a little awkward just standing there. We sat in the living room and talked, chit-chat. Then he said something about my record player and I turned my back to him, and suddenly he had his arm around my neck with a knife. He then threatened to kill me several times and tied my legs and hands. Once he turned his back to me and went to pull down a blind. I was near the door, and I had worked my hands free. But my dress was pulled down around my shoulders, and it served as a bind too. I wanted to be sure I could make it to the door. Then he turned around. At first, I went limp. I couldn't believe it was happening to me. It took me a while to grasp what was happening. I had tried to be nice to this man. I think a lot of people take advantage of nice people. I wouldn't have thought that would ever happen to me. He never actually raped me. He ejaculated all over my chest and told me he was going to kill me. But thankfully, he didn't kill her, and Susan B. felt she had reason to bring a complaint against the man, and the district attorney's office thought the case was good enough to go to trial. But the jury found the man, William Ted Willow, not guilty. Later, when the jury was interviewed, one stated, "We found him not guilty because her story didn't make sense. He never really did force himself on her. She invited him in. Supposedly, he had a knife with him and twine and gloves. How could he have gotten that in with him? She was a college student. Her boyfriend lived across the street, and he had a bad temper. She probably led the man on and then felt her boyfriend would get mad. What upset me was, afterward, the prosecutor came into the room where we were getting our purses and literally tore us apart. He specifically asked me how I could let this man go. That really tore me up. I swore I would never do that again. But after I calmed down, I felt better. It wasn't a bad rape, after all." After this whole ordeal of Susan B.'s attempted rape, she said, "She thinks a lot about Carla Walker these days, like why am I alive and Carla dead? People read about that man who killed her, and they say how awful it is that he's still loose. But to me, he's not just a figure out of the newspaper. He's a real person, and I think about him. People are not just faces in passing cars to me now. I scrutinize them." The Dallas County Now Group and the Fort Worth Task Force both urged the passage of Senate Bill 2422, which would establish a national center for the prevention and control of rape. Women are awakening to the bad joke that has been played on them for too long. And now that they know what is happening to rape victims, they are going to change the situation. We want women to be able to walk without fear and to live lives full of self-respect instead of restrictions imposed by the fear of rape. Even in Israel, the Israeli Prime Minister, Golda Meir, the first woman to hold this position, had an all-male cabinet during Israel's rape epidemic in the early 1970s. Her all-male cabinet proposed a curfew on Israeli women to curb the outbreak of rape. Her response to these men was, "But it is the men attacking the women. If there is to be a curfew, let the men stay home." A break in the case came around April 23rd, when a 16-year-old Arlington girl was involved in an attempted kidnapping, and the police believe the same man could be a suspect in the case of Carla Walker. We're interested in this one particular case, but we also want to talk to him about other cases, including Carla Walker, stated Lieutenant Oliver Ball. Continuing, he asked for the public's help for any information about this man whom they believe to be in the carpet business, due to the two-sided adhesive tape that was put over the girl's mouth, and floor sanding discs found in the mud where his truck became stuck, and how the girl got away. He also asked the public to look out for the suspect's truck, described as a 1969 through 1971 Chevrolet pickup, white over blue, with two white toolboxes on the edges of the bed. The truck has a spotlight on the left side by the windshield, 4 wide tires, no hubcaps, and either brown or gold bucket seats. The suspect is described as white, about 5'9", muscular, and about 185 to 200 pounds, with uncombed collar-length brown hair. This is that girl's story of her attempted kidnapping. I drove to the Old Trinity River Bridge to pick up my brothers, who were shooting targets there, when the man approached and asked if he could help. He then walked away, but later returned with a shotgun, threatened to shoot me when I refused to open my car door, and then bound my hands with wire and put tape over my mouth. He then ordered me into his truck, and we drove away. But he lost control of the vehicle, and it ran off the road and was bogged down in mud. He let me go, and I ran 1/4 of a mile to my car and drove home, got my mother, and we returned to the kidnapping site with some Arlington police. It was about 45 minutes later, but the pickup and the driver were gone. This man was arrested on May 6, 1974, after finding a roll of tape and a sanding disc used by carpet layers near the scene of the latest abduction. He was charged with aggravated kidnapping in the case involving the 16-year-old Arlington girl, who was able to identify him as her abductor. The next day, they put the man in a lineup with 5 other people, a police trainee, and 4 detectives. And Rodney McCoy, the boyfriend of Carla Walker, picked out the man and identified the 25-year-old as the man who abducted Carla. This man's name was Tommy Ray Nealand, and was also being questioned about the 1973 slaying of Becky Martin, who was a Tarrant County Junior College co-ed who had been kidnapped and later found dead. Homicide detective George Hudson decided to talk to Mr. Nealand about the Carla Walker murder, and Nealand said he wanted to take a polygraph test on it. He knew something about it, had read it in the paper. He said he knew quite a bit about it. The polygraph test indicated Mr. Nealand was lying, and I told him that I could not pass him on the Carla Walker killing. By November 6th, Nealand was on trial for 2 homicides and was considered a suspect in Carla's case, but had still not been charged with the kidnapping and murder of Carla Walker. He was on trial for the 1972 murders of Mary Jane Handy and Robert Taylor Golson, 2 teenage hitchhikers from Oklahoma. The 2 had been hitchhiking south of their homes near Oklahoma City 2 years ago, when they were picked up by a truck driver. On July 1st, 1972, their decomposed bodies were discovered in a remote spot near Southwest Airport. Since his arrest, Nealand had given many statements to police about the deaths of Golson, Handy, and about another woman named Nancy Mitchell, who was killed in 1970. Nealand was convicted and sentenced to 2 life sentences. February 17, 1975. The 1-year anniversary of Carla Walker's kidnapping came with no new leads in the case, and although the police believed they had the killer, Tommy Ray Nealand, in jail, he still had not been charged in Carla's murder. Deputy Police Chief J.H. Usry stated, "Officially, we're still investigating it. In fact, we chase down leads every day on it. I personally feel that Nealand was involved in it. Whether he was the abductor or the killer, I don't know. But I think he and someone else were involved with it. We even had Rodney McCoy come in and go under hypnosis. He didn't change anything, he just added to it." The description of the abductor that surfaced from hypnosis was the most detailed we'd gotten. There was a particular detective named J.F. Terrell who specialized in burglary cases. In 1975, he picked up William Ted Wilholt on suspicion of a string of burglaries. When Terrell arrested him, Wilholt said, "I wondered when you were coming after me for Carla Walker." The shocking comment startled Terrell, and while Wilholt was in prison, Detective Terrell decided to have a talk with him. I talked to him about Carla, how she was from a good family. I fed on his conscience. I told him he wouldn't be able to live with himself, so he might as well tell me if he killed her. The man began to sob and then said, "Well, I guess I might as well." But just after that moment, someone pounded on the door and informed Terrell he was needed elsewhere. And the confession he believed he was going to get never came. Terrell tried again in 1976. He went to go interview Wilholt in prison, and this is how he explained their interaction. "I started the same routine, and he just stopped me, saying, 'You almost got me with that last time, but I've learned some things since then." The interview was over. Mr. and Mrs. Walker, however, believe the killer to still be free and do not think Neeland is their daughter's abductor and killer. Mrs. Walker explained, "We've played detective for a year. We have had many suspects, but they've all been checked out. We're both convinced it was someone that knew Carla. That's what makes us think there were at least 2 people involved. The Walkers believe that whoever took their daughter waited and watched for her and McCoy to come out of the bowling alley and get into McCoy's car. While the abductors were waiting, they also checked out the car and found the passenger side unlocked. That's how they were able to open it and grab her. Another reason the Walkers believe the killer knew their daughter is the removal of a ring from the girl's hand. The ring, which McCoy had given her for Christmas, was found about 12 feet from her body. Curiously, 2 other rings and a bracelet were still on her body. The police say the ring could have come off during a struggle, but Mrs. Walker thinks it was removed deliberately by someone who knew her daughter. The Walkers even had a psychic from New York flown down on May 25, 1975, and were told from him that there's one person in Fort Worth who knows who did it, and feels there was a dark person involved in it, not a black, but maybe a Latin American. He thinks Carla was kept in the area around the culvert where the body was found for the 4 days she was missing. This psychic's information could not be verified by investigators. In this year after the tragic kidnapping and murder of their daughter, the Walkers, along with being detectives, went to school, each taking 13 hours of business courses at the city's college. But even that isn't distraction enough. As Mr. Walker, a retired Air Force lieutenant colonel, stated, "I can't say that it helps any. We see Carla walking around school. I can see her toting books around school. You see a little girl just out of high school." Continuing, he explained, "I don't suppose there is one night I go to bed where I don't think about her coming to our bedroom door and saying, 'Mother, Daddy, I'm home.' It will probably take us many years to forget all the little things she did. We are so thankful to still have our other children in our lives. 3 sons, 26, 24, and 13, and a 20-year-old daughter, who sadly lives in fear. She's afraid to drive her car alone. She's afraid to go to a shopping center at night by herself. The Walkers have kept Carla's room exactly as she left it that night. Rodney McCoy has sadly suffered a deep psychological trauma from her murder." Further reminders of their daughter's tragic death came in the form of mysterious phone calls to the Walkers' home that started happening in February 1974. Sometimes every week, other times it is every 2 weeks, sometimes in the morning and others in the afternoon. But the person calling never says a word. Mrs. Walker said, "We always say, 'Hello, hello, hello,' and they never answer. As much as a minute will pass, and it'll always be a dead silence on the other end." These calls were still happening as of November 1975. Sadly, it was announced that February that the money donated, about $7,500, would be returned. The reward funds didn't help in finding Carla's killer, and now it was time to return the money to the people who contributed it. But the reward fund was not returned, as Fort Worth police stopped the return in May 1975, saying the case still may be solved as they were continuing to work on their theory of Tommy Ray Neeland as the perpetrator. And if Neeland is ever indicted for Carla Walker's death, then the 2 people who supplied information that led to his arrest last year may be eligible for the reward, said the police. So it was decided that the fund would stay open and they would wait for possible developments in the case. But by October 1975, police issued a final appeal for information about Carla Walker. The plan now was to have the money returned by November 15, 1975. The article stated, "More than 250 persons will discover cashier's checks of various sums of money in their mailboxes next week." Don Parkinson, president of the Bowling Association, relayed, "I don't think any of us are too happy about it. We'd certainly a whole lot rather seen it spent and seen the murderer apprehended. I can't believe that if we had a substantial reward fund, someone didn't come up with the information." And Chief Usray said the case will remain open, but there are no new developments or leads. There are still 2 possible suspects still under consideration, but police lack the evidence to arrest or charge either of them. "We can't say one way or the other whether they did or didn't do it. We'll still work on it, and we'll appreciate any help anyone can give us." The Walkers said they will hear periodically from the Tarrant County Sheriff, Lon Evans, about the case, but have not heard from Fort Worth homicide detectives for over a year. And even though it seems the police efforts are lessening, it would not deter the Walkers' search for justice. The case caught a break on December 1st, 1977. Some man walked into a Tennessee police department and confessed to killing Carla Walker. Captain George Adams, head of the Sheriff's Investigation Unit in Tennessee, said that the man went strolling into a police department there and told them he killed a woman at Lake Benbrook. After talking more to this man and informing the Fort Worth investigators, the Tennessee police took him back to Fort Worth so he could be questioned about Carla. The Fort Worth investigators learned that this confession came from a 32-year-old Paris, Texas man named Jimmy Dean Sasser. Through questioning Sasser, they learned he suffered blackout spells and was in Fort Worth at the time of Carla's murder. But he had only given investigators verbal statements pertaining to the Carla Walker case. He was questioned extensively, and it was determined by the investigators that most of what he seemed to know about the case could have been read in newspapers, but that they were taking Sasser's statement seriously. But they have also not ruled out the possibility he may be a person who confesses to crimes he didn't commit. He was not charged with her murder at that time, but was being held for unpaid child support. By December 8th, Sasser was sent to Wichita Falls State Hospital to undergo psychiatric examinations. Just 10 days later, Sasser demanded to be transferred back to the Fort Worth jail, and the hospital officials complied and sent him back without being able to make any definitive determinations about the man. District Attorney Tim Curry stated that his trip to the state hospital was kind of a washout. He never was examined. He got up there, and before they could complete the examination, he told them he wanted to come back here. Curry continued that they do not have enough evidence to file a case against Jimmy Dean Sasser. Curry also had his doubts that Sasser was the killer, saying, "We've got a real problem, I'm afraid. Authorities have a man who has confessed to a highly publicized murder, but whose story bears a number of inconsistencies. You don't want to let him go, but you don't want to prosecute him if he's handing you a tale." And Curry stressed several times that it is not unusual for persons to confess to crimes that have received notoriety. Still, even with these doubts, Sasser was put before a grand jury on January 31st, 1978. During this trial, a psychiatrist told the grand jury, "If Sasser did not kill Miss Walker, he is nonetheless the sort of troubled individual capable of abducting, then strangling to death a high school girl who allegedly spurned his affections." Jimmy Dean Sasser was indicted for the 1974 murder of Carla Walker. The authorities had been keeping in touch with the Walkers since Sasser was arrested in December, but it was the Star-Telegram who informed Mrs. Walker about the indictment, to which she replied, "That's good. This is Carla's birthday." Hopes for Sasser to take a polygraph test were dashed. when a Dallas psychiatrist saw Sasser and decided polygraphs wouldn't work on that type of an individual. What type of individual would that be? Sheriff Lon Evans described Sasser as a person who hated women and who had been placed at least twice in mental hospitals. He's a weirdo. He needs confinement somewhere, whether it's in a penitentiary or a mental hospital. He's dangerous and he needs treatment. He needs to be taken out of society. By March 1978, Sasser had a court-appointed attorney, Earl E. Bates, Jr., who said Sasser had falsely confessed to this crime and had since recanted his confession. Bates really wanted Sasser to undergo psychiatric examination, writing in a motion to the judge that he believes Sasser is afflicted with some form of mental disorder, disease, or defect that may well have destroyed Sasser's ability to perceive the extent of the charge now pending against him, and that Sasser's confession to something he didn't do demonstrates the need for mental tests. The judge agreed, so on April 1st, Sasser was sent to Rusk State Hospital for 21 days for extensive psychological testing. At the time Sasser was getting evaluated, District Attorney Curry was getting some heat from the grand jury over statements he had said to the public. Curry had come out saying he had serious doubts about Sasser's guilt and of the prosecutor's chances of convicting him. But this didn't faze Curry, as he responded, "We've got an ethical responsibility not to prosecute people we don't think are guilty. The grand jury isn't paid to make those decisions. I am." Sasser's family was being interviewed while he was being evaluated, and they had some interesting things to say about their troubled relative. His mother, Bobby Sasser, said, "He needs to be put in an asylum. It's one of his peculiarities. Every time he gets drunk, he comes in and goes to the phone and says he's calling the police to turn himself in. He's done it a lot of times before." And his Uncle Joe agreed, saying, "I seriously think he needs mental help. At times he can talk to you as good as anybody. The next time, he won't make any sense at all." Sasser, 32, was a high school dropout, a man with 2 ex-wives and a history of domestic difficulties, a man who lasted less than 30 days in the Army, a service station gas pumper who could not even make correct change. He was described by several officers as a flake, a nut, and the boy is disturbed. But on April 10th, the psychiatrist at Rusk State Hospital decided Sasser was sane and able to stand trial, putting the weight now back on the district attorney's office to decide if they will go to trial or allow the indictment to be dismissed. On May 30th, 1978, all charges against Jimmy Dean Sasser were dismissed, and he was set free. In a statement, the attorney's office said, "Evidence at this time is insufficient to warrant prosecution." Sasser addressed the press after his release, stating, "This whole thing is just embarrassing to me. At the time of this confession, my second marriage had just collapsed, and I was depressed about the state of my life. The idea of confessing to the Walker killing just came to me out of the clear blue sky. Basically, I was just feeling sorry for myself and I didn't care if I went to prison or not." Later he said his time in Tarrant County Jail had cured him of wanting to confess to any other crimes. It seems he stuck to this, as I could not find any other news on him until his death on August 13th, 1999, when he died at the age of 53. Fast forward 12 years. No new articles came out about Carla until 1990, on the 16-year anniversary of her kidnapping. Rodney McCoy now lived in Alaska with his wife Cindy and 3 children. When being interviewed for this article, he stated, "I was really amazed that they haven't forgotten. I'm really happy that someone still cares." In the same article, we find out that Carla's father died 2 years earlier on February 16, 1988, of a massive heart attack. There were no new leads at this time. Carla's mother got Alzheimer's around 2010 and died in 2015. It was now 2004, and if you remember, there was a detective named Carol who believed a man, William Ted Wilholt, was guilty of Carla Walker's murder. He was now retired, but still said, "I'm 100% sure, 150% sure, I know who murdered Carla Walker." Now having more free time, he created a website in 2002 called justiceforcarla.com. By 2006, the site had been accessed more than 11,000 times, but every lead went cold. Many police departments started to utilize the internet during the early 2000s. Detective Manny Reyes, who started the Fort Worth Cold Case Unit in 2004, had 764 unsolved cases, and by 2006, 70 of those cases had been solved. They started a cold case link on the department's webpage for unsolved murders where pictures of victims were rotated. Cold cases are gaining momentum online. With shows like Cold Case Files, the internet, and computers now, people are really getting into all of this, said Reyes. The most significant modern method that is helping to solve cold cases, however, is DNA, genetic-style fingerprinting. The successful employment of DNA is twofold: preservation of the crime scene and the preservation of evidence. For Carla Walker, the DNA samples they were able to obtain so far were only partial, never a full DNA profile. In April 2019, the police released a letter that they discovered was mailed to a detective shortly after Carla was kidnapped. The detective working on the case at the time died and never shared the letter with the public or family. This letter had many redactions when sent out on Facebook, but the parts you could read said, "Killed Carla Walker in Benbrook," and ends with, "P.S. It is hard to say, but it is true." The Facebook post continued with the police statement after. The author of this letter is encouraged to come forward and speak with detectives about his or her knowledge of the murder. It is the hope of the Fort Worth Police Department that the person will provide valuable information that may bring peace and closure to Carla's family after 45 long years. Ivan Gomez, the Fort Worth police spokesman, issued this statement. Police believe that the author of this letter is not a suspect, but the detectives want to speak with him or her in an effort to develop more credible information. Jim Walker, 57, is the youngest Walker. He was 12 when his sister was murdered. After the release of this letter, he said that someone knows something. The author of this letter clearly wants to get something off their chest. It's time for somebody to do the right thing and step forward. I feel like the hand of God is in this. This will be solved. This needs to be solved for Carla. These folks are earnestly looking for justice for Carla, and we're not going away. Continuing, he expressed, "We never got a chance to form the brother and sister bond. She was 17 and I was 12, the annoying little brother. But the things she did for me let me know that she loved me." In 2018, the Texas-based podcast Gone Cold did 8 episodes about Carla Walker's case. The host got Carla's friends and acquaintances to talk about the case like never before. This podcast then inspired 2 women, Diane and Kathleen, to pitch Carla's story to producers of the TV show The DNA of Murder with Paul Holes, a TV show on Oxygen that helped to crack the case of the Golden State Killer. This episode aired in April 2018. The 2 detectives that reopened the case, Wagner and Bennett, saw the episode and decided to strike up a deal with Holes. They would give him access to various police files in exchange for his show paying for advanced DNA testing that they felt the Fort Worth Cold Case Department would struggle to get approved. They chose the Serological Research Institute in Richmond, California. There, the analyst uncovered male DNA from 3 stains on Carla's clothing that had never been successfully read before. This was a huge win, but this high didn't last long, as the DNA profile was not found on CODIS, a law enforcement database that features the DNA of millions of offenders. Hull's team then decided to send the results to another lab that specialized in creating genealogical profiles. They gave the lab the highest quality DNA sample they had available, but the lab, who they would not name, failed. Hull's informed the officers of one more lab, called Othram, a Houston-based forensic genealogy lab located in the Woodlands. But to go with this lab meant that they would have to risk the last sample they had, and this particular sample was of the poorest quality than the other 2 that had already been tested. The investigators went to check out the lab, and while there, the Othram staff expressed they were confident in their ability to do what the other lab could not. The detectives decided to give them the go-ahead. Thankfully, this was the right decision. This lab is able to do state-of-the-art parallel DNA sequencing, which uncovers genetic identities through DNA, rootless hair, and decades-old bones. They can reconstruct the sample's genome using a minuscule portion of the sample. The lab then uploaded the data from the sample onto GED Match, a website where individuals publicly share their DNA. They got a hit on what seemed like a distant relative, and from there, they were able to construct a family tree to trace the distance between the DNA on GED Match and the sample. This all led to 3 brothers with the last name of McCurley. The detectives recognized this name. McCurley was on file as an early suspect in Carla's case. The man they had on file was Glenn McCurley. So on July 7, 2020, investigators collected trash from a garbage can in front of McCurley's house and had them sent for analysis. It was on September 4th that police received the results, and it was a DNA match to the one they collected from Carla Walker's clothing. On September 10th, 2020, police said they returned to McCurley's home and were invited inside, where they spoke to both him and his wife. McCurley told the same story to investigators in 2020 that he'd given to detectives in 1974. He said he didn't kill anyone and did not know Carla Walker. He was asked to provide a DNA sample. He agreed and signed a consent form. 2 swabs were taken and sent to a lab for analysis. 6 days later, on September 16th, police said they were notified that the swabs matched the DNA found on Carla Walker's bra. On September 21st, 2020, 77-year-old Glenn McCurley was arrested for the 1974 murder of Carla Walker. Jim Walker was so happy to hear that there had been an arrest in his sister's case, he said, "When I heard about the arrest, I don't think it's hit me just yet. There was a little bit of peace. I was emotionally still exhausted, but happy. I felt like this had finally come to a conclusion." So who was Glenn McCurley? Glenn was born in Oklahoma, living most of his childhood in Hollis, Oklahoma. He was arrested on February 15, 1961, when Abilene police caught him stealing a 1955 Pontiac from a bowling alley. They chased him 130 miles west to Stanton. He ended up going to prison for 2 years, but only served 11 months before being paroled. He He was also accused of stealing a car from Colorado City, about 70 miles west of Abilene, and was arrested after a police chase. But he has no criminal history in Tarrant, Dallas, or Denton counties. On February 16, 1963, Glenn, then 20, married Judy Watson at Crestview Baptist Church in Midland, Texas. She was 17 years old and a senior at Midland Lee High School at the time of their marriage. The couple had 2 boys, Craig, born in 1963, and Roddy, born in 1966. Glenn was a truck driver when the McCurley family moved to the Fort Worth area in 1972. Judy began a successful and long career in childcare at Ridge West Baptist Church in Fort Worth. February 16, 1974, was Glenn and Judy's 11th wedding anniversary, but they would not be celebrating that night together, as she would be out of town. So Glenn went out drinking. 2 months after Carla Walker's kidnapping and murder, Glenn McCurley was identified as an early suspect because he owned a .22 Ruger that matched a magazine found at the crime scene. And the Fort Worth police tracked down all sales of Rugers, interviewing all the buyers as potential suspects. Glenn was 31 when he was called in for an interview and told police his wife was in West Texas and his gun had been stolen 6 weeks earlier. But he didn't report the gun stolen because he was an ex-convict. This was the only time Glenn was questioned until his DNA was found on Carla's bra in 2020. Glenn McCurley and his family went on with their lives as usual. A neighbor was quoted as saying, "He owned at least 2 homes. He had a couple of kids, and he was a God-fearing, church-going man." Tragedy hit the McCurleys in 1988 when their son Craig, 24, was killed by a drunk driver when driving home from celebrating his college graduation. Other than this, Glenn seemed to live a pretty normal life, but fate caught up to him as technology got better. People were shocked about this news, with one neighbor stating, "I just absolutely cannot believe it. He was a quiet man. They were a very nice family. They were active in the church. He was always in church. It's unbelievable. I would have never guessed." Next, I will explain the events that took place that February night in 1974. I didn't think I could be disgusted by this man any more than I already was, but after his arrest, Glenn did a jailhouse interview for a radio show and told his version of the story. Here it is. "I did not kidnap the teenage victim, but rather saved her from a boyfriend's assault. I drank heavily before encountering Carla Walker. I was driving around, parking, drinking, when I stopped in the Wrigley Bowl parking lot and found Walker and her boyfriend. He was hitting on her, and I was drinking beer in the parking lot, and I saw him. He was screaming, and I went over there and opened the door and knocked him off of her. I pulled her to my car. We talked for a while, and she calmed down. And she said she was thankful for me getting her away from him. She just gave me a hug. I gave her a kiss. I mistook her for something else. I didn't mean to do it." Glenn McCurley was officially charged with the 1974 kidnapping, rape, and murder of Carla Walker on September 24, 2020, and was being held on a bond of $100,000. In October, that bond was raised to $500,000 during a hearing held over Zoom with officials and jailed suspect Glenn. After a failed argument by defense attorney Stephen Myers, where he stated that factors such as decades living in the same Fort Worth home and his liver cancer mean he's not a flight risk, with Kim Davignon, assistant district attorney, arguing the heinous nature of it in 1974 was unfathomable to city residents. the judge agreed and raised his bond from $100,000 to $500,000. After the arrest, Detective Wagner explained, "It was a mixture of emotions, a little bit of shock, excitement, a little bit of fear. It's one thing to work toward a goal, and it's another to achieve it, and this was a huge goal. It was a really big win for us and the Walker family. We're just ecstatic that we could finally come to a head after all this time." Jim Walker made this statement, "The word that came across my brain was, finally. After 46 years, 5 months, and 3 days, we have a name, a face, and are working toward a complete resolution. This is a resolution that's been prayed for by many people for years now. I feel like God put the right 2 detectives on the case." Jim then added his family was praying for the suspect's family and said that what happened to his sister was not their fault. He added the Walker family wanted to see justice served in Carla's death, and that prayers and forgiveness do not come with a get-out-of-jail-free card. The last known news of this case came in November 2020, when a grand jury indicted Glenn McCurley on a charge of capital murder for the 1974 kidnapping, rape, and murder of Carla Walker. When more information becomes available, I will update y'all. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like and subscribe button below. If you want to inquire about a commission, you can email Russell at russellstewart.art@gmail.com. You can watch Russell livestream his art on Twitch. And if you want to hear more true crime stories, you can subscribe to my podcast, Crimes of a Decade, a Texas true crime podcast. Now that we are done, make sure to wash with the brush. Just beat the devil out of it.